Your job is pretty easy today because my name is also Emmanuel and I also went to Sciences Po, so it's just have to repeat the same presentation over and over again. The late President Bush, who passed away recently, used to dismiss what he called the vision thing. And he didn't need a vision thing to successfully handle the end of the Cold War and to build an international coalition against Iraq. And I guess the same could be said about the architecture thing. I don't know what's a Mediterranean architecture, but I do know that Nicolas Sarkozy's Union for the Mediterranean, which we just mentioned, has been basically a flop, and that the so-called Barcelona process has only produced hot air. And what is needed to defend Israel's interest in the East Mediterranean is neither a vision or an architecture, but I would say a clear assessment of the region's changing dynamics. Now, Israel's relations with the countries of the Eastern Mediterranean have gone through profound changes. We used to have an alliance with Turkey and no relations with Greece. Today, we have an alliance with Greece, and our relations with Turkey are on the rocks. Even though I read a few minutes ago that our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, said that our relations with Turkey have improved dramatically in the past few days, because it used to be that Erdogan would call Netanyahu a Nazi every 2 days, and he says now he only does it every 6 days. So there's an improvement. Now, it's important to understand why, in order to explain, it's important to understand why we've shifted alliances in the East Mediterranean in order to understand Israel's foreign policy in the coming years. Now, as we know, Turkey and Greece are historical rivals, but when Israel became independent in 1948, it had more support from Turkey than from Greece. Greece, by the way, was the only European country that voted at the UN against the partition plan in 1947, and for 42 years it refused to recognize Israel de jure and to establish full diplomatic relations. One reason for that was that there was a very big Greek diaspora in Egypt, and that President Nasser at the time threatened the Greeks that if they would recognize Israel, he would take possession of all the property of the Greek community in Egypt. Now, eventually, the Egyptians did confiscate most of the assets of the Greek diaspora anyway, so Greece theoretically could have recognized Israel, but then it didn't happen because of the Cyprus issue. When Cyprus became independent in 1960, Greece lobbied for support at the UN, and therefore it was under the pressure of the Arab and Muslim states that were more eager, of course, to support Turkey being a Muslim country. And of course, there were many downs and very few ups in that relationship, especially during the Lebanon War in 1982, when the Greek Prime Minister at the time, Papandreou, made those comments comparing Israel to Nazi Germany, etc. And at the time of Papandreou, the PLO's so-called embassy in Athens was its strongest international foothold. And things started changing with the electoral defeat of Papandreou in 1990 and the establishment of a centre-right government. Full diplomatic relations with Israel were established in the early 90s, and in recent years, the relations between Greece and Israel have warmed considerably. In 2010, Benjamin Netanyahu became the first Israeli prime minister to visit Greece, and the Israeli and Greek air forces started their first joint military exercises. In September 2011, Israel and Greece signed a security cooperation agreement, and Israel now uses the Greek airspace for training purposes. With Turkey, relations with Israel have evolved the other way around. With Turkey, we had this relationship already in the 50s because with the pro-Soviet coup in Iraq and the political union between Egypt and Syria in 1958, Turkey's regional standing was weakened and threatened, and it provided an incentive for Turkey's rapprochement with Israel because of Turkey's conflict with Syria. And because Turkey was threatened by Soviet expansionism and Arab nationalism, it was interested in upgrading its ties with Israel, and as a matter of fact, the Mossad established at the end of 1958 a triangular intelligence agency with Turkey and Iran. The highest intelligence officers in Israel, in Iran, and Turkey met twice a year and shared information on the Soviet Union and on the Arab states. And in addition, the Iranian Revolution of 1979 added a common enemy between Israel and Turkey, because for Turkey, its what was at the time its secular state model was threatened by the expansionist Islamic Republic of Iran. And again, also the conflict between Turkey and Syria was one of the reasons for the close ties between Turkey and Israel at the time. But those relations with Turkey also eventually soured. It started when Erdogan's party, Justice and Development, won the election in 2002. One of the first major changes in Erdogan's foreign policy was to refuse the request from the United States to use Turkey to attack Iraq from the north, even though Turkey is a NATO member. And overnight, if you remember, Erdogan became a hero in the Muslim world. But then again, it's not only because of that, it's also because Israel became less important to Turkey with the end of the Cold War, the end of the Soviet threat, as a Turkish diplomat admitted candidly to an Israeli audience at the time, quote, "We don't need you anymore, there's no more USSR and no more Arab subversion." And by the way, Erdogan even jailed most of the intelligence officers who had upgraded relations with Israel in the 1990s when Israel and Turkey signed a military cooperation agreement in 1996. Now, a turning point in Israel's relation with Turkey and Greece was the year 2010, because the Mavi Marmara incident, I would say, sealed the divorce that had been brewing for years between Turkey and Israel. But this divorce occurred right after the revelation of Israel's huge natural gas resources and after the bankruptcy of the Greek economy following the 2008 financial crisis. And this created a de facto common interest between Israel and Turkey, but also with Cyprus, which, as we know, also has huge natural gas resources and also has, of course, a conflictual relationship with Turkey. Now, as we know, there is this pipeline project between Israel and the EU that was agreed upon recently, which also involves Greece and Cyprus. Just last month, in November, the three countries, Israel together with Cyprus, Greece, and Italy, signed a memorandum of understanding to build what is meant to become the world's longest natural gas pipeline, which clearly shows that Israel has chosen the Greek option over the Turkish option. Now, Turkey, of course, is opposed to the Israel-Cyprus-Greece partnership in natural gas, but it has not been able to stop it. Turkey tries to reduce its dependence on Russia, but it has been bypassed by the Israel-Cyprus-Greece project together with Italy. And this is a blow to Turkey because Turkey, as I said, is highly dependent on Russia for its import of natural gas. Turkey imports about 99% of its natural gas resources, 60% of which comes from Russia, and half of Turkey's electricity is produced out of natural gas. Now, Israel, Greece, and Cyprus all benefit from this natural gas partnership. Israel acquires a stronger leverage and strategic value vis-à-vis the European Union by becoming a natural gas exporter. Greece is acquiring the status of an energy hub, and Cyprus gains regional and international importance. Now, Israel, Greece, and Cyprus are also increasing military cooperation. So, in the East Mediterranean, Israel's regional partnership has shifted from Turkey to Greece. And natural gas plays a key role in this shift of alliances. Now, I'm not going to go into details on the issue of energy because this is going to be the topic of the next panel, but I do want to mention one last point in the emerging partnership between Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and Italy. This emerging energy hub has many enemies whose ability to disrupt the pipeline project should not be taken lightly. Turkey opposes it for obvious reasons, but as we saw, there's actually little it can do to block the project. But more serious obstacles are likely to come from within the EU. I spoke last month at a conference in Madrid about the new opportunities created by Israel's natural gas resources. It happened that my talk was a couple of days after the announcement of the memorandum signed between Israel, Cyprus, Greece, and Italy on the pipeline project. Now, critics of that project call it the pipe dream. And at the conference in Madrid, there was a Spanish energy expert who said it's not a pipe dream, it's a pipe nightmare. And he made 3 points. A, he said, I don't want my tax money to subsidize this project. The EU, by the way, is supposed to put some money into this pipeline. B, I don't want this new energy hub in the East Mediterranean because it would compete with Spain, because Spain happens to have the EU's highest capacity of LNG, liquefied natural gas regasification. And C, who needs natural gas anyways, since the EU will eventually rely entirely on renewables? Now, you can imagine that I did argue with him, especially on the third point. But the point here is that Spain sees this emerging partnership in the Eastern Mediterranean as a potential competitor. And it is therefore probably going to lobby Brussels against the project of the pipeline between Israel and Italy. And Spain is certainly going to lobby against putting EU money into a project which it doesn't want in the first place. So the project should not be taken for granted. Israel, in my opinion, made the right choice by going for the Greek option, but it will have to fight hard to make sure that the pipeline project and the new geopolitical architecture in the East Mediterranean become a reality. And last point, just to show that Israel is really putting effort in trying to lobby support within the EU and among European countries for this project, is that the Italian Deputy Premier and Interior Minister Matteo Salvini is in Israel today, and there's a meaning to it. It's not only that Israel is very much enjoying itself using the very European tactic of divide and rule within the European Union to promote its own interest and break the Brussels consensus, and Israel has been doing this very successfully, but also in order to make sure that this project, which would have a huge potential for the Israeli economy and regional power, would have enough support in Europe. So I'll leave it here. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.